Hello and thanks for tuning into the show that goes around the continent to bring you stories near and far. I'm Chamberlain Usoa, Channels Television here in Abuja. I'm joined by Heidi Adams from the Voice of America in Washington.
Thanks. I'm Heidi Adams at the Voice of America. Happy to be with you again for another edition of Africa 54. Let's start off with the latest from Nigeria. Chamberlain Uso in Abuja brings you that story.
As Nigeria prepares for the 2023 National Population Census exercise, the federal government meets with development partners, diplomatic corps, and members of the private sector in Abuja to seek support. The Minister of State for Budget and National Planning, Mr. Clem Agba, says over 60% of funds needed for the census has been released, but appeals for more funding.
It's the second time officials of the National Population Commission are meeting with development partners, the diplomatic corps and members of the private sector as preparations for the National Housing and Population Census continues. In the few months of the census, it appears there are a few grey areas to be covered.
The number one challenge is funding. Number two challenge is actually funding. Number three challenge is funding. And then number four, security. There are a couple of cultural issues that we also need to deal with.
Although the pockets of insecurity where the National Population Commission conducted the enumeration area demarcation in some local governments, the chairman of the National Population Commission allays fears that the exercise may not hold in some communities as he calls for support.
In addition to Abadan, there are a few local governments. We've done the fiscal area demarcation, but there are some areas like in Bidingwari, we couldn't get the entire local government. So we use the hybrid there too, and as well as a few local government in Nofara. So, and this hybrid is as good as our people going to the field.
Representatives of development organizations lend a hand of support for the exercise, highlighting its significance to national development.
How do we make all of these wise decisions for the betterment of this country? It's been said by many of you, Nigeria needs evidence. We need to know what does this great country look like. We need to understand that everyone counts. We need to understand that if we don't know that, we will continue to make a lot of hit and possibly a lot of miss in our decision making.
One of the objectives of the meeting is how to source for funds for the national exercise, and the National Population Commission is promising to manage the funds in a transparent manner.
Well, joining us to discuss this is the Director of Public Affairs, National Population Commission, Dr. Isiaka Yaya. Glad to have you on Africa 54.
Yeah, thank you, Chamberlain.
It's few weeks to Nigeria's census exercise, and there are grey areas to be covered before its commencement. How prepared is the Commission for this exercise?
Yes, thank you very much. Of course, for every massive operation like the census, there will be possible grey areas. But what I can say is that those grey areas, they are actually turning to be white areas because the issues around them are being resolved. For example, there were a lot of apprehensions about the 2023 general election and whether you could combine census with election. Of course, the first leg of the election had passed, and we are confident, that the next level, will not be a problem to the conduct of the census. Also, concerns have been raised about, the issue of insecurity, whether a census could be conducted within the context of a deteriorating security situation. All I can say is that if election could be conducted like it was done about 2 weeks ago, with little incident, definitely census could as well be conducted. So in terms of that being a gray area, I can say that has also been resolved. On the issue of funding, concerns have also been raised whether our national economy, can support the census. This is an issue that is being addressed frontally and is going to be a multi-pronged approach. The federal government has actually made a lot of commitment to the census, and realizing the fact that, the census is beyond what the federal government alone can do. We are trying to mobilize resources, especially from the international community and the private sector, to support the census. As you are aware, a high-level partners stakeholder engagement took place about on Monday, 6th of March. Our commitments were made. We had a shortfall of 327 billion, and efforts are being made to mobilize these resources from various sources, both in cash and kind. So largely, I can say that the gray areas around the census, they are being removed, and we are confident that the census will be conducted smoothly.
Well, Nigeria is conducting the first census in 17 years. For some time, it's timely for some people, but for others, it's ill-timed. What is the Commission doing to ensure a successful head count despite the timing?
Yes, thank you, Chamberlain. We are actually making efforts, to conduct the census. Well, for those who said census is a time, of course, the gray areas I addressed earlier will have shown that there could not have been a better time for census than now. And we are advancing on all fronts to see that the census is conducted. First, we have carried out the enumeration area demarcation, which is the division of the country into small enumeration areas in all the 774 local government areas in the country. That's a basic step in the conduct of this census, and we have done that. We have also started the process of recruiting and training the ad hoc workers. As you are aware, we are recruiting over 1 million ad hoc workers for the census, and this will be in stages. The first level of trainings, they have actually taken place. We have trained the specialized workforce, the data quality managers, and the facilitators. The next level of training, which is the final one, is the training of the supervisors and enumerators, including the field coordinators. We have also started that process, and that will eventually launch us into the census. As regards the equipment to be used for the census, as you are also aware, we are going to use the personal digital assistants. We have received this equipment, and they are being presently configured. So largely, we are prepared to conduct the census.
Well, the Commission says this year's census will be digitalized. Are we expecting an error-free exercise, unlike the BVAS and IREB ordeals during the conduct of the just concluded general elections? Will everyone count?
Yes, we are expecting that deployment of technology, will produce an error-free census. Counting a population of over 200 million, you don't have any option really, except to use technology. And we have actually tried to make sure that everything works well. For technology to be deployed effectively, the workforce to be deployed, we need to be properly trained. And for the enumerators and supervisors who will be using our PDA, we have actually scheduled a period of 10 to 12 days of intensive training, including practicals. I'm not sure whether INEC, spends such effort, to train the workforce. So, but we are confident that the way we are going to train, the personnel, the field personnel, they will be able to competently deploy the technology we are going to use for the census. That's the first point. The second point is that what we'll be using the PDA for is not the same thing that INEC used the BVAS for. BVAS, I understand, is to capture biometric information of voters to ensure that the person bringing the voter's card is also the person, the real owner. But for the technology we are going to deploy, it's less ambitious. We are not collecting biometric information. So in this case, the rate of error, particularly as a result of network, will not be there in the case of in the case of the census. And lastly, again, we need to know that the conversation or controversy that has been generated, on the use of the BVAS, and INEC capacity to utilize has largely been partisan. And this is not unexpected because this is election. I mean, there are contending parties who want to win that election.
Well, Dr. Isiaka, glad to have you. Thank you for joining us on Africa 54.
Yeah, thank you, Chamberlain.
Welcome back to Africa 54. I'm Heidi Adams in Washington. Zimbabwe is attempting to update its agricultural sector with support from controversial partner Belarus, which is under sanctions for supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko visited Zimbabwe on his first trip to sub-Saharan Africa. Columbus Mavunga reports from Harare, Zimbabwe.
After years of letting the country's farmers mostly plow and seed their fields by hand, Zimbabwe's government has started large-scale mechanization of its agriculture industry, which has suffered from low productivity for years. The equipment comes from Belarus. 28-year-old farmer Mufudzi Madzorera received a tractor and is encouraging others to use agricultural machinery too.
I managed to do over 100 hectares of land. I ripped it and plowed it at my own time, at my own pace. And it's way better than hiring out. Hiring out, it consumes time and honestly, it becomes more expensive. Owning your own tractor is cheaper because the government of Zimbabwe is then giving us an option whereby you can pay for this in a period of 5 years.
Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko visited Zimbabwe on January 3rd, bringing with him 1,000 tractors and other agriculture equipment.
Но мы готовы всегда помогать вам.
Despite the distance that separates us, we are ready to cooperate with you, to get everything you need, to give you a helping hand, anywhere, anytime, help you address all the issues, all the problems that you have.
Belarus is the subject of US and European sanctions for supporting Russia's war on Ukraine, something Zimbabwe's president addressed.
Both Belarus and Zimbabwe are serious candidates of sanctions. So it is not surprising to see victims of sanctions cooperating.
The US, the EU and other Western nations imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe's leadership in the early 2000s following reports of election rigging and human rights abuses.
Zimbabwe is trying to modulate isolation, to modulate sanctions by going to those states that Zimbabwe perceives to be safer and better to deal with, because those kinds of dealings, they do not come with any form of conditionalities such as democracy, such as issues of human rights, etc., which normally the West insists on.
Agriculture was once Zimbabwe's economic backbone until the land reform program of late President Robert Mugabe drove experienced farmers off their land in the early 2000s and sent farm production into a downward spiral. With help from Belarus, the government hopes it can revive the sector and rejuvenate the long-struggling economy. Columbus Mavunga for VOA News, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Every year, March 8th is set aside to celebrate women across the world. The International Women's Day, this year's theme is a clarion call for women to embrace equity. To mark this day, the Nigerian Export Promotion Council, that the NEPC, says it's working out plans to increase the number of Nigerian women in the trade and export zone. At the moment, there are over 3,610 women exporters in the country. Despite the challenges hindering the business ecosystem, the NEPC has promised support to female exporters to make it easier to get made in Nigeria products to different parts of the world.
It's the International Women's Day, and the efforts of these women are laid out for the world to see. Some of the exporters are looking at expanding their horizons beyond the shores of Africa. They are, however, seeking for policies that will help their businesses to thrive.
I'm looking beyond just sending my things to individuals. Would want access to bigger markets where we can actually stock our products in other stores.
They should make the requirement to getting finance easier for us to assist us.
Done with the tour of the products, officials of the Nigerian Export Promotion Council returned to the hall to celebrate the women's contribution to the growth of the nation's non-oil sector, despite the challenges staring them in the face.
The Council's quest to increase the participation of women in non-oil export led to the launch of the Women in Export Development Program in 2017. Through this program, NEPC created a Women in Export Unit and assigned women desk officers to provide support services for the 3,610 female exporters who are currently registered with the Nigerian Export Promotion Council, as well as other women entrepreneurs who are interested in non-oil export.
In 2022, non-oil exports rose to $4.82 billion, representing an increase of 39% compared to what was received in 2021. The council says that will increase with the increased certification of more female-owned export businesses. The business ecosystem is riddled with challenges that hinder the export of products from Nigeria. However, the promises made to these women by NEPC would possibly make it easier to thrive in efforts to get made in Nigeria products to the world.
The past year saw little progress in tackling global corruption due to greater violence and insecurity, according to the organization Transparency International. Their annual index measures citizens' perceptions of the level of corruption. As Henry Ridgewell reports, there are some encouraging signs that corruption is being successfully tackled in Africa.
For the 6th year running, South Sudan, Syria and Somalia are at the bottom of Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index. The report says conflict and corruption create a vicious cycle.
Having weak and corrupt police and defense sectors, including also here other law enforcement organizations or institutions such as the courts or the judiciary itself, it is very unlikely that we will be able to tackle organized crime or the effects of organized crime and terrorism.
The report says Russia's invasion of Ukraine last February exemplifies the threat that corruption poses for global security. The authors say Russian oligarchs have amassed fortunes by pledging loyalty to President Vladimir Putin, who operates with impunity in the absence of any checks on power. Transparency International says perceived corruption worsened in Brazil under former President Jair Bolsonaro. Bolsonaro's supporters attacked the parliament, Supreme Court and presidential palace following his election loss in January.
It is much easier for corruption to occur when these checks and balances are weaker. That's why one of our main recommendations this year and also in the past has been to really focus on establishing very clear separation of powers across the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive whenever we have those three branches of power.
The index ranks 180 countries by the perceived level of corruption, using data from 13 external sources, including the World Bank. Denmark, Finland, and Norway top the index. But several European countries are at historic lows, including Britain, which has slipped 10 places in the past 5 years, following a series of political scandals. Some African nations have made significant progress, including Angola, Ivory Coast, Ethiopia, and Senegal.
7 of the 24 countries that we see improving are actually in Africa. So this is one of the regions that is stuck at the bottom of the index, but where we also see progress happening.
Transparency International said governments must do more to tackle corruption by reinforcing checks and balances on power and upholding rights to information. Henry Ridgewell for VOA News, London.
A young entrepreneur in Benin Republic, Roland Ajove, is converting plant waste to briquettes of charcoal for cooking fuel. Roland says maize husks, cassava peelings, coconut shells, and other organic wastes are some of his unusual raw materials. Now he hopes to create a more environment-friendly charcoal for use and help preserve the forests in the country.
Dismayed at the number of trucks carrying piles of charcoal out of Benin's forested back country, Roland Ajovi was inspired to look for a more sustainable alternative in 2017. Maize husks, cassava peelings, coconut shells and other organic waste have become raw materials for the 36-year-old entrepreneur's charcoal business.
I said, how come Iraq's to fight against deforestation, yet we have so many bags of wooden charcoal being transported to our cities? So that's what motivated me to start my own research. It is 3 times more ecological than normal charcoal, because it has a very, very high calorific value and allows the food to be cooked very quickly.
According to a UN Food Agency report, over 60% of the world's charcoal is produced in Africa, where it is sourced mainly from forests and woodlands, driving forest degradation. Only a small volume is produced sustainably. Ajovi is among those trying to change this. He and his employees collect, sort, and dry the organic waste before burning it into a carbonized powder that is processed into briquettes and sold by the kilogram or in larger sacks.
Here, the process does not contribute to deforestation. We don't need to cut trees in the forest. We don't need to destroy all the vegetation to reap the rewards. It is the agricultural debris that have already become useless that allow you to make this coal. Also, this coal does not give off much in terms of pollution.
The UN Environment Programme, which also highlighted similar projects in Ethiopia, Cameroon, Kenya and Tanzania, says this kind of innovative charcoal production is urgently required to prevent further forest degradation and loss of biodiversity. For now, EcoSeeker sells at a small profit to wholesalers, but Ajovi believes as people learn of the properties of his charcoal, sales will increase.
Electric scooters are buzzing in cities all over the world. With accidents rising, some scooter operators and local authorities in the United States are using technology to improve safety. Deanna Mitchell has our story.
It's cheap, it's convenient, and it's fast, and it's honestly fun. I like being outside a lot. It kind of just works.
Since her car broke down, Julia Montoya has been using an electric scooter to get to her job at an Austin, Texas coffee shop. Even at night, or in heels, she says the e-scooter is easy to ride.
I've never had an accident. There have been close calls, just with bumps in the road and stuff. I think normally I try to use the bike lane.
Safety advocates say where people ride e-scooters, whether in bike lanes or on roads or sidewalks, is key to reducing the nearly 450% increase in e-scooter-related emergency room visits between 2017 and 2021.
Frankly, what we find is that a lot of people who are riding on sidewalks, either they just don't know that they're not allowed on sidewalks, or they're doing it more as a survival thing because there's not a bike lane.
Joseph Al-Hajri, Austin's Shared Mobility Services Supervisor, says his team is working with operators to improve safety.
We're definitely developing new things that allow us to enhance that for micromobility users to park, to guide them.
E-scooter operator Bird is using new sensors that detect locations within centimeters. Scott Rushforth is Bird's chief vehicle officer.
It can tell how fast the vehicle's going and how it's leaning and what you're doing with the throttle and brake. And then it also takes GPS signals in, which allows the vehicle to say, I know where the sidewalk is, and if you enter it, it's going to immediately, very, very, very gracefully and gently, we will slow them down.
Al-Hajri says boosting overall commuter safety means reducing single occupancy vehicle use, especially for trips of less than 1 kilometer, by getting more people to use alternative transport, including e-scooters. Dina Mitchell for VOA News, Austin, Texas.
And that is our show for today. You can find all the continent's top news and world news online at voaafrica.com. Check it out. I'm Heidi Adams in Washington. Channels Television has our last word.
We look forward to bringing you another show next week. Don't forget, channelstv.com is your source for news and other programming. I'm Chamberlain, so thank you for watching. Goodbye.